we could make a big difference. Next up, it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ankita Chachra, who is in the Global Designing Cities initiative as a program manager. Ankita was one of the core team members in the production of the Global Street Design Guide, so many late nights and long hours. But at the moment, she's been spending the bulk of the time doing technical assistance, mostly in Sao Paulo and in Mumbai. And she's going to delve a little deeper into some of the work on the ground that we've been doing, applying those strategies to try and really help people see an alternative. And finally, she is a great street shaper, but she's also a great Bollywood dancer. So if we're on time, she may show us a little bit at the end of her talk. Thanks, Ankita.
Thank you, Sky. So I'm going to start with this video, if it works. Is it working? Can you guys just check up there? All right, great. And while this video is taking place, let me first start by giving a big shout to all the designers, planners, engineers, and practitioners in this room who know how hard it is to get projects on the ground. And yet, we also know that there is nothing more magical when we see the street that was not serving anyone well turn into the space which is inviting and welcoming and really brings people together. But most projects, of course, take a little more time than this video to get implemented. And that's because the process of implementing a project is like this picture. You get everyone together, there are a bunch of conversations, of course there are some agreements, and no one ever disagrees. And often it happens so fast that all that you're left with is this blurry memory. But we also know that the process itself is more important. And the fact that it is how we get there and how we change hearts that really matters in the end. The designing of the process itself helps change people's mind. But what do you do when you don't speak the same language? And by that, I don't just mean like English, Spanish, Portuguese, but also the same concepts and vision that people use to identify their streets. Sky mentioned we work in 5 different cities. None of them have the same language, different cultures. In fact, even in our team, we speak different languages. We don't even speak the same English, if you know what I mean. And when you're writing a book, that's very handy, just so that you know. But so what we had to do really was to come up with this way that could bring this language of design together, come up with tools and strategies that we could communicate with, firstly with each other, and then with our cities. So luckily, I've got a secret recipe here. It's very secretive, so you guys are very entitled to this, that we came up with as tools to figure out how we were going to work in our cities. And like any secret recipe, it's the basic ingredients that come together in street transformation, and if when they're put together on the right time and the right order, they add up to people and place. So we start, of course, with the basics. You've got the paint and you've got the brushes. It's quick, it's cheap, and it's high impact. Then you've got the planters for beautification that also helps in delineating some spaces, designating areas where people can sit, stand, but also you've got treatments that can guide people's movements. And then to that you can add, of course, all the placemaking elements, whether it's a chair or whether it's an umbrella, but that allows them to be safe and comfortable. But most importantly, it comes down to people. People who don't just use the space, but also help create the space. Sky mentioned that there are these nights that we've spent changing the streetscape. So it's the people who were supporting us then, but also I want to talk about the people who own that space and make it their own by maintaining it. And I have to talk about the story of this lady. When we were doing São Miguel, the video that you saw, the night before I couldn't sleep. Also because I had to wake up at 1 a.m., so that was another deal. But one of the reasons that I was worried was there was going to be no food or drinks because we couldn't find a street vendor for crying out aloud. But when we go on site and we start changing the streetscape, there's this lady who comes almost very shyly and almost like feeling like she needed permission to be there. And she asks us, I have some juice and beer and water. Can I just sit in the corner here? And I was like, no, you can't. You have to be right there in the center because it's you who's going to make this place. And she did. I mean, just the smile on her face was just amazing to see throughout the event. So coming back to change and adding people and coming back to the idea of toolkit, we also need to figure out the strategy of using this toolkit. And every project has to start somewhere. As designers, we're often scared of making mistakes, of not getting it right. There's the idea of accountability, liabilities in some cities. And for communities, it's the idea itself of change. They've never seen the street differently before, so why should they believe you that you're going to make the difference? Well, the good news is we don't really have to jump the deep end. We can try something, we can test some things, and we can also train ourselves. So, turns out using cones, chalk, and having a bunch of experienced engineers on site can work really well. There is time that we have to move beyond what's drawn on paper to really test it out on site. And like Sky mentioned about the example from Addis, the toolkit has been really helpful in training planners and engineers. It's been an opportunity to capitalize on the momentum that we've created during the trainings itself and allow people to try their solutions that are drawn on paper and test them on site. There is power in going from paper to practice, even if it's temporary. For the next one, which is showing to build support. That's another strategy, of course. And here, whether it is just for a few hours that you change a space, in Bogota, these school children came in on a Tuesday morning to see a traffic calm street, to in San Miguel, the video that I showed you. Now, this is in the outskirts of the city, and you can see there's no space for people to really walk, or they have no direction, and the cars are speeding. To really convert it into something that allows them to reclaim their space. We were able to reclaim 850 square meters of space here. And remember the secret ingredient recipe that I mentioned? It's all in there, just for a different time and a different area and a different city. And I know Ed mentioned the team, and I have to talk about the team. We were all there from 5 a.m. in the morning trying to paint the streets. And there were about 50 partner organizations, a bunch of volunteers, a bunch of students who were really interested in it. And one of the running joke was that any media or any communication we do, half of the page is just filled with the number of partners. And you can see that even here, half my slide was almost filled with the number of partners. And these partners were not just there with us on the day off, but they were there throughout the process, engaging with community, allowing people to understand that the streets were more than what they were used to seeing them as. So really becoming our interpreters in believing in change and seeing change through the communities. And of course, like any good project, we were measuring change, looking at perception of people, how that had changed from feeling unsafe before to feeling much more safer in the same space. And beyond perception, also, we wanted to bring numbers in there and talk about reduction and talk about throughput, because that's what mattered for some other people. And I'm going to go through these quick stories that I feel that I wouldn't do justice if I don't talk about them. Talking about unifying cities to speak the same language, we used the same toolkit in Mumbai, and of course here the strategy was slightly different. The intervention happened in the outskirts of the city, so we couldn't bring people to this intervention to experience and see the change. So we took the intervention to the people with the help and support of the media. Now, I've lived in India for most of my life. Never ever in my life have I heard any newspaper article or anyone talk about pedestrian rights. But this was the first time that there were these week-long articles that kept coming in, that kept talking about this intervention, putting that pressure upwards towards to buy that political support to ask for that change. So there was a demand that the media could generate through this intervention. Also, you can always tie up with existing events, like what we did in Sao Paulo and Fortaleza. But what's interesting is that standing shoulder to shoulder with some of the engineers the night before when you're working on ground, you can really have discussions, and you can really talk about changing things. And knowing that the stakes are low, that this is only going to be for one day, you can go bold. And that's what we did in Sao Paulo. I have some colleagues here who were there, and I know we have Eloisa from Sao Paulo here too with us. She was great to work with. And you can see this change. And what's amazing is now we're working towards improving and informing the manual. So we're really changing the state of practice through that one intervention and that one night. I mean, if you're at a site with someone till 1 a.m. in the morning, there's a different bond. So I don't know how much that counts to it, but that definitely helps. And then Sky mentioned Fortaleza. And one of the stories that is my favorite here in Fortaleza is the fact that this woman here took it upon herself to get over 6 pages of signatures so that the space that was changed could stay changed. She had seen the change, and she believed in this change, and that was her contribution to it. So she was empowered as the community to ask for it. And of course, the mayor, after that, announced a citywide program for such interventions. And coming back, lastly, to wrap this up, is Addis Ababa that Sky mentioned. But the idea that you can start with just one line, one training, and take it into the next stage of interim and capital construction. And now the city just recently launched a safe intersection program. So that one day at site and that one line that you drew in a training to going up to or scaling up to something that is as big as a citywide program can happen with these tools. So whether it is the mayor in Fortaleza or the engineers and authorities in Addis, we can all speak the same language. And lastly, when we think of change, we always think of these big, heavy, capital projects, but the true change always comes from within. And whether you call it the small wins or tactical urbanism, it's these tools and these changes that not only empower us as designers, but also empower the citizens in the community to ask for change, demand for change, and most importantly, believe in change. Thank you. I'm going to ask, do we have time for a video? It'll be very quick. No? Okay, 40 seconds? Okay, great. So here's the Bollywood moves that Sky mentioned.